Okay, let's dive into this. You've probably taken steps to, lock down your phone, secure your laptop, maybe even put a sticker over your webcam.
Right. You're thinking about digital privacy.
Exactly. But what about that big screen sitting in your living room,
Yep.
your smart TV? Is it just there for entertainment, or is it maybe doing something else entirely?
That's precisely what we're digging into here. We've pulled together a whole stack of sources for this, looking at recent security warnings, some pretty deep research studies, legal filings that honestly reveal surprising stuff.
And even patents.
And even patents, yeah, that really lay out how these devices are designed to work behind the scenes.
So our mission with this deep dive is really to unpack all these sources, figure out exactly what kind of data these smart TVs are collecting, why it even matters to you.
And crucially, what steps you can actually practically take to protect yourself a bit better.
Because, well, it turns out that device you just want to kick back and relax in front of might be watching and frankly selling more about you than you probably realize.
The fundamental shift to grasp here, I think, is that a smart TV isn't just a passive display anymore, not like the
Yeah.
old TVs.
Right.
It's a connected, interactive computer, basically built into a screen. And it's designed not just to show you stuff, but yeah, in many cases to gather information about you. It's very much a two-way system now.
And this isn't some far-off sci-fi risk, is it? I remember back in, 2019, the FBI actually put out a warnings specifically about smart TVs.
They did. They pointed out that these TVs could potentially be entry points for hackers, maybe even used to, spy through built-in cameras or microphones if they have them.
Wow.
So the whole security conversation has definitely broadened. It's not just about your phone or your computer anymore. You really have to think about securing all the connected devices in your home, and that includes the television.
Okay, so how? How exactly does this collection happen? The sources seem to point to a few key built-in methods. One of the big ones you hear about is ACR.
ACR, yeah.
Yeah.
That stands for Automatic Content Recognition. It's tech that's embedded in a lot of smart TVs these days.
And how does it work? What does it actually do?
Well, basically, it analyzes the video and sometimes the audio, too, that's coming through the screen. It then compares what it sees or hears to this massive database.
And when you say analyze, it's not just like, oh, they're watching a drama. It's more detailed.
Oh, yeah, much more detailed. Research shows it can identify exactly what you're watching, like down to the second, whether it's a specific scene in a movie or even a particular ad that just played.
Down to the second. And get this, some of the research, like Dr. Peter Snyder's work at Brave back in 2021, it indicated ACR can collect data even from stuff plugged into the HDMI ports.
That's right. That's a key finding. So if you're watching, say, a Blu-ray disc or maybe playing on a game console that's hooked up via HDMI,
Yeah.
the TV's ACR can still potentially analyze that signal and report back what you're watching or playing.
Even though it's not coming from the TV's own apps.
Exactly. And a UC Berkeley report from 2018 confirmed this wasn't just theoretical. ACR was widely present in millions of TVs from the big brands Vizio, Samsung, LG. It's pretty common tech.
Wow, okay. So even watching a DVD, it's not just tracking what you stream through the TV's smart interface, but potentially anything you feed into the screen.
Potentially, yes. It
Yeah.
depends a bit on the specific implementation by the manufacturer, but it's analyzing the visual signature, the sort of digital fingerprint of the content itself.
Okay, now here's where it gets, for me anyway, really unsettling. There's another process, right? Documented in a U.S. patent, 10,951,698B1, filed by Enscape Data Services.
Ah, yes. Sometimes it's called something innocuous like smart interactivity.
Right, sounds helpful.
Yeah.
But the patent actually describes real-time visual sampling. What is that?
Well, it seems to involve the TV actually snapping images, like screenshots of what's being displayed on the screen.
Snapping images, how often?
According to the sources looking at this patent, it could be up to like 30 full frames every minute.
30 frames a minute.
Ah.
Okay, but here's the kicker. The patent describes it, potentially doing this.
Yeah.
Even when the TV's in standby mode. Like off, but plugged in.
That's what the documentation suggests, yeah. It's presented not as a bug, but as a feature, built in. A way to monitor screen activity even when you think it's just sitting there.
That's something. Okay, so beyond the visual stuff, many smart TVs obviously have voice control now, which means voice capture.
Yes, absolutely. If you use those voice features, your conversation, or at least parts of them near the TV, might be captured. And often, this voice data gets translated into text, frequently using a third-party service to do the processing.
Which just makes me think of that kind of infamous warning from Samsung years ago,
Mm.
basically telling people to be careful what you say in front of the television.
Right? And try not to have any sensitive conversations. It felt like a moment of accidental honesty, really.
It really did,
Yeah.
revealing the reality of what those mics might be picking up, and importantly, how that data gets handled.
Yeah, it underlines that these aren't just simple listeners waiting for a command. They could be processing ambient audio. And then, of course, there are the apps themselves.
Ah, right, like phone apps.
Exactly like phone apps. The ones you install on your smart TV, Netflix, YouTube, whatever. They communicate, not just back to their own servers, but potentially sharing information with the TV manufacturer, maybe even with other apps on the same TV.
And just like with phones, if the TV's basic security isn't super strong, all that app data could be vulnerable, right?
That's a definite risk. So you've got ACR tracking content, this visual sampling, grabbing screen images, even in standby, voice capture, potentially listening, and then apps collecting their own data on top of that. It's a lot. Where does it all go?
Yeah, what happens to this flood of information?
Well, it all gets aggregated, put together. It's used to build these incredibly detailed digital profiles about your viewing habits, your daily routines, your preferences.
Profiles, like
Yep.
advertising profiles.
That's a big part of it, yes. But some sources even raise the concern that sensitive information could potentially get swept up too. Like if banking details briefly appeared on screen while you used an app, or if you mentioned something sensitive near an active microphone.
Could that end up in the profile?
Yeah.
Especially now people use TVs for finance apps or whatever.
It's a potential risk flagged in some of the security analyses, yes. And this profile building gets even more powerful because of something called cookie syncing or count linking.
Okay, what's that? I remember a Northeastern University audit from 2021 mentioned this for streaming platforms.
Right. It's basically about connecting the dots, linking your activity on the TV, what you watch there, with your activity on, say, your phone or your computer. They use identifiers like advertising IDs or logins to match you across devices.
Ah, so they can see this person watched this show on TV and then search for this product on their phone.
Exactly. It lets them build a much more comprehensive, sort of 360-degree view of your behavior and interests, all across different devices and platforms.
And then this super detailed cross-device profile. Where does it live?
It enters a marketplace, a huge data marketplace that, according to that 2023 joint study by University College London and UC Davis, most of us don't even know exists. It's largely invisible.
Who's buying?
Primarily data brokers and advertising networks. They eagerly buy this data because it powers targeted advertising. It feeds the whole global ad economy, really.
So your TV watching habits are literally a commodity.
Absolutely. And that study also pointed out that once this data is packaged and sold, it could potentially be accessed by others too, maybe hackers who breach a data broker or even government agencies through various means.
And what are these profiles worth? Is there like a price tag on my viewing habits?
Well, that same UCL-UC Davis study actually put some numbers on it. They estimated a single viewing profile could sell for anywhere from, say, $5 to $15, depending on how detailed it is.
$5 to $15. Doesn't sound huge,
Yeah.
but multiply that by millions of TVs.
Exactly. And they highlighted something else really significant: children's viewing data. They said it's particularly valuable for what they called early behavioral modeling.
Early behavioral modeling, what does that mean?
It means by analyzing what kids watch from a young age, companies try to predict and maybe even influence their future behavioral, their future purchasing decisions.
Wow. So influencing future consumers.
That's the idea. And having that kind of granular data, especially on kids, can apparently drive up the price for ads targeting those profiles by as much as 30%.
Okay, so it's not just about showing me ads for stuff I might like now. It's about building these deep behavioral models, possibly starting really young, to influence what I might do or buy later. That's a different level.
It is. And beyond the privacy angle, there are also some very real security risks this brings into your home network.
Right, because the TV is connected to your Wi-Fi.
Exactly. It can inadvertently become a weak link, a sort of backdoor into your entire home network.
How's
Well, one major issue, pointed out in a 2020 report by Checkpoint Research, is just weak factory default passwords.
like the classic admin and password or 000.
Precisely. Simple, preset usernames and passwords that are often the same for millions of devices. They're easy for hackers to find online or just guess, potentially giving them remote access to the TV.
And once they're in the TV.
Once they've compromised the TV, they have a foothold on your home Wi-Fi network. From there, they could potentially try to move laterally, as they say, to access other devices on that same network.
Like,
Your smartphone, maybe your laptop, smart speakers, even things like baby monitors or security cameras if they're on the same network and have their own vulnerabilities.
okay, that makes sense. It's like finding one unlocked door lets them roam around the whole house, digitally speaking.
That's a good analogy, yeah. And going back to those built-in mics and cameras we mentioned,
Okay.
a 2022 study from Carnegie Mellon University warned about the potential for unauthorized sensor access.
Meaning hackers turning them on.
Potentially, yes. If there are unpatched software bugs or just poorly designed firmware, these embedded microphones and cameras could potentially be activated remotely without you knowing, turning the TV into, well, a listening or watching device for an attacker.
Which maybe starts to explain why you see pictures of people like Mark Zuckerberg or hear about former Google engineers physically putting tape over their laptop cameras and mics.
Exactly. It's a very low-tech but practical acknowledgement of that vulnerability, a physical block for a digital threat.
Okay. Given all of this sheer amount of data collection, the security risks, you'd think, all right, fine, I'll just go into my TV settings menu and turn all this tracking off.
Right. You would think so. But the sources we looked at make it pretty clear that the idea you can just easily opt out. Well, it's often, unfortunately, more of an illusion of control.
An illusion. How so?
Well, for starters, finding the settings can be a challenge. A 2022 study in the journal Technology and Privacy found that these privacy options are typically buried really deep in complex menus.
Like how deep?
Often requiring, they found, something like 8 to 10 clicks just to get to the relevant options.
8 to 10 clicks just to find the setting. That feels almost deliberately difficult.
It certainly doesn't make it easy for the average person, and then when you finally do find them, they're almost always turned on by default. And the language used for the opt-out options can be really vague or even misleading about what data collection you're actually stopping.
So it might say, improve viewing experience when it means let us track everything.
Kinda, yeah. The wording can be tricky. And here's another kicker. Even if you navigate that maze and manage to turn everything off, it might not stay off.
What do you mean?
According to a 2023 Privacy Reset study from University College London, something like 60% of major smart TV brands they looked at were found to silently just turn tracking features back on after a firmware update.
Silently. Without asking you again.
Without prompting the user, without notification. The settings just revert back to the default data collecting state in the background when the TV updates its software.
That is incredibly frustrating.
Yeah.
So you do the work, you think you're protected, and then an update just wipes it out without telling you.
It really is. And this kind of practice leads to things like what the Electronic Frontier Foundation, the EFF, calls consent washing.
Consent washing. What's that? Sounds slippery.
It is. It's basically where manufacturers might redefine what counts as personal data in their lengthy terms of service agreements.
How does that help them?
Well, they might argue that, say, your raw viewing history or the metadata coming from your HDMI inputs isn't technically personal data under their specific definition, even though it's clearly linked to your TV and your household's habits.
So they redefine the terms to exclude the very data they want to keep collecting, even if you clicked a button saying, don't collect my personal data.
That's the kind of concern groups like the EFF raise. It gives the appearance of respecting privacy choices while potentially continuing the collection under a different label.
Wow. Okay. And of course, the data collection doesn't stop with the TV maker anyway, does it? There are the apps.
Right. That's the other layer. Even if you somehow manage to block every bit of tracking from the TV hardware itself, the moment you log into a streaming app, Netflix, Hulu, Amazon Prime, whatever, their data collection starts immediately. They have their own systems.
Because they're separate companies with their own privacy policies, their own tracking tech.
Mm-hmm.
What are some examples from the sources about how those apps handle data?
Well, Netflix, for instance. You can hide shows from your viewing history list on the screen, make it look like you didn't watch something.
Yeah.
But according to past transparency reports and analyses, the data itself isn't actually deleted from their servers. It's still there, used for recommendations, profiling, all that stuff.
So hiding isn't deleting. Okay. What about others?
Amazon's interest-based ads setting is another example. If you turn that off, they'll stop showing you ads tailored to your viewing, but the setting explicitly states it doesn't stop them from collecting the data about what you watch and do on Prime Video.
So they still gather the info, they just don't use it for those specific ads.
Correct. And Hulu reportedly had its most comprehensive privacy controls kind of tucked away under a specific state privacy law section, like for California residents, which means users outside that state or just people who don't know to look there might never find the most detailed opt-outs.
So you've got these layers upon layers of tracking. The TV itself, then each app on top of it. It's no wonder there's been some pushback, right? Legally.
Oh, absolutely. There's been significant legal and regulatory attention. Probably the most cited early case was back in 2017, the FTC complaint against Vizio.
What happened there?
The FTC found Vizio had secretly collected really detailed viewing data from about 11 million TVs, second-by-second stuff, without properly informing users or getting consent. Vizio ended up settling for $2.2 million and had to delete a lot of the data they'd collected improperly.
$2.2 million for 11 million TVs?
Yeah.
Maybe not a huge penalty per TV, but it definitely set a precedent.
It did. Then, jump to 2020, a big multi-district class action lawsuit was filed. This one targeted LG, Samsung, and Sony.
What was the claim there?
It cited violations of various privacy laws, like the Federal Video Privacy Protection Act, VPPA, and different state laws. The plaintiffs were seeking pretty substantial compensation for those alleged violations.
And things are still happening now, right? You mentioned Europe.
Yes. Just last year, in 2023, the European Data Protection Board announced it was launching investigations specifically into Samsung and LG. And one key focus was exactly those allegations we talked about, firmware updates potentially resetting user privacy settings without consent.
So regulators are definitely paying attention to that reset issue.
It seems so. It highlights the growing global concern. And,
Yep.
Jeff Chester, who directs the Center for Digital Democracy, he testified before the U.S. Congress back in 2020.
What did he say?
He described smart TV tracking quite starkly. He called it potentially the most invasive, invisible form of commercial surveillance that we currently face.
Most invasive, invisible form.
Yeah.
Strong language. Okay, so with all this going on, knowing how complex it is, what can people actually do? We need some practical steps.
Right. And while, as we've said, turning off tracking might not be a perfect, foolproof solution, the sources do suggest several things you can do to make yourself less of an easy target.
Okay, like what? On the technical side.
Well, one thing is, if you get a new TV or want to reset your current one, do a factory reset. But crucially, during that initial setup process, slow down.
Don't just click next, next, agree.
Exactly. Pay really close attention. Read the prompts carefully, because this is often where they ask for permission for ACR or other tracking features. And the wording, as we discussed, can be kind of sneaky or buried in jargon.
Good point. Be mindful during setup. What else?
Specifically, look up how to disable the ACR feature for your particular TV model. Each brand tends to call it something different.
Like those names you mentioned.
Yeah, Samsung might call it Viewing Information Services or something similar. Vizio uses Smart Interactivity. You need to find out what your brand calls its ACR and look for the specific setting to turn it off, if possible.
Okay, dig into the settings for that specific feature.
Absolutely. And here's the big one. If you primarily use external devices like an Apple TV, a Roku, a Fire Stick, a game console for all your streaming and viewing.
Yeah, if you don't really use the apps built into the TV itself.
Right. If you don't use the TV's smart features directly, then consider disconnecting the TV from your Wi-Fi network entirely.
Just don't connect it to the internet at all.
Exactly. If it's not online, it can't send that data back to the manufacturer or other third parties. It becomes just a display again, like an older TV.
That's probably the most straightforward way to cut off the TV's own data flow, assuming you don't need its smart features.
Yeah.
What about physical steps?
Well, if your smart TV happens to have a built-in camera or even microphones that you don't actively use for voice control,
Yeah.
the simplest and maybe most effective solution is often just the low-tech one. Physically cover them, a piece of opaque tape, a little sliding camera cover you can buy online. Just block the lens or the mic holes.
Right, the tape solution.
Yeah.
A low-tech fix for a high-tech problem.
It works. And the sources also briefly mentioned that some third-party services are starting to emerge specifically to help with this kind of thing.
What kind of services?
Services that might help you manage device security across your home network or potentially help you scrub your personal data from those data broker websites where these viewing profiles often end up. Some might even monitor if your data appears in those marketplaces.
Interesting. So help cleaning up the data trail after the fact. Okay, so let's try to wrap this up. Looking back at this deep dive into all these sources, The main takeaway seems pretty clear.
Yeah, I think so. Smart TVs have really evolved far beyond just being entertainment devices. They are, in many cases, sophisticated machines designed for pretty extensive data collection.
And that collection brings both significant privacy risks and, as we saw, real potential security risks that go way beyond just getting targeted ads you don't like.
Absolutely. The data collection is broad, it's often hidden or non-obvious. It can happen even when the TV seems like it's off. And as all the research and legal cases suggest, it's surprisingly difficult for regular users to truly opt out effectively.
Yeah, those default settings, the confusing menus, the firmware resets, it feels stacked against the user.
Manufacturer practices and just the way streaming apps themselves are designed often make full control very challenging.
So maybe the final thought to leave people with is this. Considering the sheer scale of this data marketplace we talked about,
Mhm.
and the real monetary value being placed on your viewing habits, especially how it's used for that behavioral modeling,
Yeah.
what does this continuous, often hidden collection of data from the screen in your living room really mean for how companies understand you, maybe even try to influence you? And, maybe more importantly, what responsibility do the manufacturers have to make genuine privacy and security the easy default option, instead of some buried fragile setting that might just get switched back on anyway? That wraps up today's discussion. Thanks for watching and tuning in. If you're curious to dive deeper into this topic, make sure to visit our website. The link is in the description below. Don't forget to subscribe and click the bell so you never miss an update. See you next time.